Once someone close to you dies and you really understand and acknowledge that death, you become part of the club. You don't want to be a member of the club, but here you are. Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm a Buddhist practitioner out here in the world, having experienced the loss of my loved ones and knowing how much my Buddhist practice helped me on my grief journey. And now, together, we have this safe space to discuss death, dying, grief, and the Buddhist teachings that help us really understand attachment, impermanence, being compassionate, being death ready, what it means to live a life so that we can have a peaceful death. Yep, it's a big topic, and we're going to take it on together. Let's go. My father's breathing changed, and my mother was worried that his oxygen supply was not working. She called the hospice help number a few times, and each time they patiently explained that this was a normal part of the dying process. This was at once difficult to face and yet a relief. There was nothing wrong. He was on his way. Today, I welcome Linda Hochstetler, and I hope that you all will as well. And she is an accomplished social worker, psychotherapist, and Buddhist meditation teacher, and author of 21 Days to Die, a Canadian Guide to End of Life. So you can see where she is just like a dream come true for us here on the Death Dhamma podcast. And so, Linda, thank you for being here and for being so generous with your time. And perhaps maybe you want to add to or embellish the brief introduction that I just gave you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I am really happy to be here. I am probably one of the few social workers and psychotherapists that I know that says my specialty is illness, dying, and death. I put it right out there. That's what I talk about. That's what my passion is. That's what I wrote a book about. I do a lot of other little things on the side, but that has been my passion for 30 years now. And it just never tires. It kind of moves around. I started out in grief work and switched over more to hospice palliative care. And then becoming a meditation teacher, I bring in the Buddhism and the meditation side as well. And there are so many incredible death practices in the Buddhist tradition that I'm having such fun with it.
I love that you say that you're having fun with it. Now, everyone, you're not going to see this, but we are on camera, and I had already complimented Linda because she uses a lot of red and some bright colors. And, she talked about bringing this brightness to the topic of death, and that is much appreciated. And my guess is that with your ability to cover death and help people and bring a lightness to it, I bet you're as busy as you ever want to be.
Totally.
Yes.
It is the way it goes.
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm going to start with a basic in Buddhism, and yet it's a basic, but it's not. And when I say that, it's because sometimes we each in our different practices interpret the noble truth, the second noble truth of suffering in a different way. So when I ask you how you process it, how you say it, I'm not tricking you. I want to just level set and, gain an understanding of how you perceive the second noble truth.
Yeah, so when I hear it translated, there are so many different ways to translate it. And I combine both my Buddhist hat as well as my psychotherapy hat when I translate it more like stress. I also see it from a clinging perspective, that often it's about clinging to things that you want and want them to last longer, and things that you don't want and wanting them to last shorter, and that coming and going. I also look at it sort of as a small t trauma. That's a way of looking at suffering. And by small t trauma, I mean, we're not talking about abuse and murder and any of the big type of things that we might, understand to be impactful, but all the little things every single day that are traumatic to us, that have a big emotional impact. That's suffering.
Okay, I get that. And I appreciate that description. And I'm really, I find that you're differentiating small t trauma out as very helpful, because I do think we live in a time where there's a lot of discussion around trauma, and rightfully so. But sometimes I do, as a person just living in this world, have a hard time separating between things that happen in my daily life that are upsetting
Mhm.
and recognizing those as trauma versus, like you said, abuse and murder and, big, I guess, is it proper to call that capital T trauma?
Yeah, that's more capital T trauma. What everybody would kind of agree is definitely upsetting. But for each of us personally, we know that the day-to-day of small T trauma is also very upsetting
Mm-hmm.
and worthy of being looked at.
And it wears on us, that's for sure. And with your work helping people with grief and death and dying, I'm picturing you're with somebody riding these waves of
Mhm.
these different types of trauma because of the different types of clinging and aversion that are happening in the process, depending on who is your principal person you're supporting. Is that fair?
That's right. So I deal with people from the actual diagnosis all the way through, all the ups and the downs, the treatment, the palliative care, all like it can be days, weeks, months, years, and decades even.
Yeah.
So it can be quite a long journey for dealing with someone when they're dealing with dying and death. And I always use that sequence. You might notice I don't talk about death and dying because that's not the sequence it goes in. You start with dying, and that truly is often the hardest part.
You're
And then
right.
there's a death moment at the end. And by then, that's not the tough part. So I lean heavily on the dying part. And that's why I wrote a book called 21 Days to Die, because it's like it's the part before the death moment that is actually the hardest. That's where the clinging is. That's where the suffering is. That's where all the losses, we sometimes call them like the cascading losses, but there are like so many losses leading up to the last breath. And all of those losses are so painful and there's so much suffering.
So much there. Like I'm having all these just like epiphany aha moments as you're speaking to me because I think I don't know why we started saying we like culturally started saying death and dying. I do, but you're right. I appreciate really acknowledging the chronology, which is I'm dying and then there's death, and
Mhm.
I feel like I'm going to change now. And as you're speaking, I remember, a couple of different things, but one thing that I'd like to share quickly. When my dad was dying and we were working with this wonderful volunteer hospice service, and
Mhm.
there was a moment where my dad his breathing changed, which,
Mhm.
as you know, this is a normal part of the process.
That's right.
And my mother was very upset. And I think we tried to kind of say, remember, because they did do a good job of explaining excuse me, the stages, but still, it's one
Mhm.
thing to hear it, and it's another thing to really internalize it and understand. And they were so kind. And so she kept calling them and saying, like, he can't breathe. And I don't know if should I adjust his oxygen and everything. And they were so kind in
Yes.
just explaining to her calmly, because I could hear on the other end of the phone. And finally, she got it. He's
Yes.
going into this type of breathing, which means he's getting closer to death. And I saw her go through like this relief of no, he's not suffering. You don't need to fix the oxygen flow, but also, oh my God, he's closer to death.
There is actually some relief of
Mhm.
having a guide tell you this painful part of watching your loved one uh,
Mhm.
have their breathing change and look like maybe they can't breathe and are suffering, and to be told the end is very near.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until we're there, we don't want to ever imagine that there's relief because the end is near. And yet, there is a moment in most caregivers, whether they're family or friends, um,
Mhm.
their experience when they recognize that the death moment is coming and the suffering is about to end for the dying person.
Mhm.
Hasn't it's not ending yet for the bereaved people, but just knowing that when the breathing changes, it's often in the last 24 to 48 hours, and when that happens, the suffering is almost over.
And that's
And
exactly what it was. Exactly what it was. Absolutely. I'm going to go backwards a little bit now here. Um, when do you feel like you really first came to terms with connecting with the truth of suffering? When did that really become, I'll say, I don't know, front and center, or really had deep meaning to you in your life?
well, so I'm someone who, at the age of 22, had a boyfriend who I slept with one night, and the
Mhm.
next day he was gone.
Oh
He
my
died.
God.
So
Okay.
this is the sort of the tragedy that you wouldn't wish on anyone.
No, you would not. Hmm.
but it happens, and I'm not the only one that it's happened to. It was literally at the beginning of our relationship. We had barely gotten started, but it was a sudden death. He was hit by a car. He was on his bicycle, and he died. And I was thrust into what I call the club. I didn't join. I didn't want to join, but it was the club where I realized, oh, people actually die. Death happens. And
Yes.
there is a moment for almost every person on this planet when they watch someone else die ahead of them. Sometimes people are in their 70s and 80s before they actually are close enough to watch.
That's
We have
true.
a death denying society where often we have loved ones dying and we don't see it, or don't recognize that they're dying until they actually die. We avoid hospitals, we avoid hospices, so that it's very easy to get up into our upper years and actually truly never join the club.
I like that you call it the club because it is true. And as we walk around in this world, and I do things like talking to people like you and occasionally talking to other people about their experiences and what has happened. And maybe once in a while helping with a woman who's, newly on her own, newly widowed. And you're right. There is this differentiation between those of us who have experienced death and recognized it and I don't want to say, I don't know, welcomed it, recognized it, don't push it away. We're not in denial of it. Versus others who maybe haven't had a real brush with death yet, or somehow were able to ignore it when they did. And so you're right. It is a club. There is a difference for sure. Definitely.
And you don't have to even choose it. Like I'm going to be the first to say, I never attended counseling. I never did grief counseling for it. It's kind of shocking in hindsight. But I seemed to be okay. I carried on my life. I graduated university. I didn't actually feel like I needed anything. And if you had met me in my 20s, I would have said I was untouched. I would have said nothing changed.
Okay.
However, a few years later, I found Buddhism and really dove into some of the impermanence components of Buddhism. I became a therapist and began working in grief, other people's. In hindsight, I'm kind of like, well, it was kind of obvious. But at the time, if you had met me, I would not have ever said, yeah, I'm interested in death.
That's okay. I mean, you can see how it was. When I say behind the scenes, it's not really behind the scenes, but in a way it was, because I feel like what you're saying is that you were going about your life. This thing had happened to you, but you were going about your life and you were performing in your life. And yet you had this experience. And then there you go, all of a sudden, so to speak, finding yourself becoming somebody who could work with others in grief.
Yeah.
Magic, right? Magical.
Yeah. Exactly.
And so, one of the questions I like to ask is like, how did your encounter with suffering help bring you to a place where you decided to help others? I'm thinking that this experience is what brought you to the place of working with others in grief. What do you think?
Yeah, it's really sort of a honing of it. So, I had this experience when I was 1 year away from graduating with an undergrad in psychology. And, if this hadn't happened, maybe I would have become a famous psychologist doing, I don't know, personality or something light and fun. But instead, I ended up working with young offenders. I then went on to get my master's degree to actually go into therapy. I wanted to do therapy. So, it seems kind of obvious. It wasn't like I was in the corporate world or something and then suddenly decided I wanted to help people. I was already on the path even before I'd experienced death and even before I became a Buddhist. And, all of those were, I had a few feet on the path before this event happened. And I had a few other, experiences in my 20s that also kind of showed me suffering. And so then by the time I got to my 30s, I knew suffering. And I was ready to deal with my own and also to believe that maybe I could help others.
And I'm sure you do. And I know you do. And I know that your book is helpful to others. I am curious about something.
Sure.
You entitled it A Canadian Guide. And on the one hand, I get that because it helps, people in your country seek this out. But I'm thinking that there's common themes there that would work, maybe not all around the world, but in other Western countries. Maybe it's fair to say it that way. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the death process is the death process. It happens universally around the world in all cultures. That part doesn't change at all. The
Mhm.
reason I called it the Canadian Guide is because throughout the book, I have many links to other people working in the Canadian healthcare field. And I really leaned heavily on the other voices, many of whom are not very well known. And I
Mhm.
really wanted to sort of push them out there and get them well known. There seem to be so many other books written from other countries' perspectives, and I wanted one that was a Canadian one. All the quotes that are in the book are from other Canadians working at end of life. And there's also a lot of healthcare information that if you are in a different country, the healthcare system is quite different because it's, that's so it's not so the death process and the dying process and the
Mhm.
stages of dying are all the same. That's the universal around the world. But the way the healthcare systems interact with the dying process, that's uniquely Canadian.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I like that. So you've customized it, you've tailored it so that if I read it and I'm in Alberta, I'm going to see and recognize possibly names of people maybe near me or in the country and how to
Yeah,
reach out and navigate and work through the system that I live in.
that's it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And so, you're working in the world to help us with the suffering around death and dying. What do you think is the most common challenge that you encounter in your work, or challenges, it's probably more than one, that you're encountering with us as human beings as you're working with us?
I think I would say the most challenging thing is just recognizing how much loss is with us all. And we may say, well, I don't need to read this book because I'm not dealing with death today.
Mhm.
But there's not a week that goes by that we don't experience loss. There's not a month or a year that goes by, and loss is just a part of everyday life. And I would just say every single client that comes to me is bringing some form of loss, some form of disappointment, some form of something ending that they thought was going to be a little more permanent, if not totally permanent, whether we're talking jobs or relationships or finances or health. We all bring losses, and it's those losses that are part of being human, and yet many times they're really hard to deal with on our own.
Oh, and sometimes we maybe don't even recognize something as a loss, or at least on the level. So, for example, if I lost my job, in that phrase is actually the word loss, lost, I lost my job. However, I might not be understanding that it is something that I'm going to have grief about.
I was just going to say one example might be a miscarriage. And of course, we know it's a death, but
Mhm.
traditionally, women never got time off work. They never qualified for any sort of EI benefits. No one really acknowledged it. Often they wouldn't even share it. And it's an example of a tragic loss of dream. But as long as the body recovers, people are expected to recover and try again and try to conceive and carry on their ways. And there seem to be more and more miscarriages today. I don't think it's just that we're talking about it, but it's an example of a loss that is really disenfranchised, and we don't know how to support someone with it. And I think we have a lot of these kind of losses that
Mhm.
we don't know how to even name it as a loss because it seems like it barely even began, and yet it's a loss. We experience it. There's feelings and thoughts that go with that loss, and that's what makes it grief.
I wonder if the because I have seen and been around women who have had experienced that particular loss, and I haven't gone through that, so I can't, I can only imagine. But I feel like sometimes it's treated like a, not only like a secret loss, but like you said, that try again thing. It's like I hear people say things like, well, I'm sure you can try again soon, or next time will be better. And when I hear somebody say that, it hurts me, and I'm not even the one going through it.
It's as if something's replaceable. And there's a lot of these, just before our podcast here, this interview, I was speaking with somebody who has lost a pet recently, and their dog died a couple of weeks ago. And pet loss falls in that category as well. So when his beloved dog died, there was struggle, there was sadness. And again, it's kind of disenfranchised. We don't know what to do with it. We think it's just a pet, and we want people just to move on and get another one and, replace it and pretend that you don't have feelings about it. And yet we do have feelings. We do have thoughts. We're human. And there are many, many things like that we're uncomfortable holding the pain for someone else, for our friends, for our family, when they have these losses.
And we do have very deep feelings towards our animal companions, and they are, to many people, very much like family members. I mean, my goodness, all someone needs to do is go out on social media and see all the cat videos and dog videos, and you can see the closeness, and get around the time of the holidays and see the person who's posting, "I'm so happy I'm closing the door and spending New Year's Eve with my dog." And that's, and I get that there's a whole other group of people who don't understand that. I guess that's where we want to seek to just give each other compassion and look and see, I don't get it, but I get that you're suffering.
Yeah. And that's just finding the humanity to relate, whether we can personally relate to it or not, finding the humanity to say, I get that that's hard for you.
Yes. Yes. It doesn't, I don't have to get it. I just have to understand that this is a difficult time for you. Have you had, I'm sure you have had more than one moment where you really realized that this was your calling, this was your work? Maybe it happened with a particular relationship with someone, or a particular moment in your work where you knew that this was the path that you needed to stay on.
Well, it's ironic. We're just chatting about pets here a moment ago. And so my moment was with my cat. And I had a cat that was a beloved family cat, and she'd been with us for actually more than 20 years.
Oh.
And I was thinking about career changes at the moment, and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And over the course of a single weekend, I watched her go from being kind of an aging cat that couldn't jump on chairs and couches anymore, but she could at least still hang out and be loving and enjoy our company. And over the course of a weekend, she slowly died, and she couldn't climb up the stairs. She couldn't go to her kitty litter. She couldn't eat. She couldn't drink. And at the very end, we just held her, and I whispered in her ear, "We love you. You're free to go." And she had no medication. She didn't go to the vet. There was no euthanasia. She was just surrounded by love.
Aww.
I whispered in her ear, and the next morning she was gone.
Aww.
And I just, I thought about it and said, this was just such a beautiful home death. I have now seen how beautiful death can be. I wonder whether humans can do this well. I wonder whether we can do for humans what we do for our pets sometimes, where we can just be with them and we can whisper goodbye when the time is right. And we can give them reassurances that we love them and we wish them well as they transition. And so it was an inspirational moment. And I knew that I was ready to go in a transition point from doing grief work, which was really a lot of that after the fact work. I had enjoyed that. I had done that, but I wanted to learn the process. I wanted to learn what was happening. And as I began talking to other people who had pets, including vets who watched aging animals, I learned that there's an actual dying process. I learned that the reason my cat couldn't jump up on the couch was because the kidneys were failing. And I'm like, oh, kidneys fail. Oh, I see. And so I started volunteering. And the more I watched, the more I realized the patterns. And I think this is also my Buddhist mind that says, watch the patterns and see what is generalizable. And I began to realize that the patterns of the dying process, they follow in a sequence. This is what you'll read in my book. It's very clear. They follow from, extreme fatigue. That's where everyone gets to. And then it goes from there where the water leaves the legs. You can't get out of bed. So you're bed bound. And when you're bed bound, you can't walk to the washroom anymore. So then you start having 24/7 care. And then you can't eat, and even the muscles of the throat no longer work. You can't swallow food, and then you can't drink water because even water swallowing doesn't work anymore. And finally, you can't breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Is the sequence. And I've
Absolutely.
watched it hundreds, I think I don't know, more than 1,000 times at this point. I don't know if I'm into the multiple thousands, but
Mm-hmm.
I watched the dying process so many times, it became really clear. And when, the name of the book, 21 Days to Die, comes from the 21 days it takes for the average person to die in a residential hospice in Canada.
Okay. And that's from the beginning. When do we start the counter, if you pardon my asking in that way? Like, at what point was the beginning? Was it when I got tired, when I got the extreme fatigue?
It goes a bit after that. So there is extreme fatigue. And for some people, this can last quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
It can go up and down. But when you can no longer get out of bed anymore,
Mm-hmm.
that is when most people say, we need 24/7 care because you can't walk to the washroom. And when you can't walk to the washroom, that's a time to enter a residential hospice.
Okay.
And from there, the the legs not being able to support you when you walk safely, from that moment to the death moment is on average 21 days. For a disease like cancer, there's a lot of different trajectories. Some of them take longer, some take shorter.
Mm-hmm.
It is really an average, but there is a sequence. It doesn't jump around. And once one drops and can no longer walk, no amount of physiotherapy is going to help you walk again.
No. And I think now I'm currently in the middle of writing something about a little bit about death denial. And that's where sometimes I see some people, sometimes especially family members who are having a hard time acknowledging that their person is going. That's where sometimes people jump in and they want their person to like start, doing some leg exercises and things, and it really doesn't make sense. And that's that.
One of the most common things we see is feeding.
Mm-hmm.
That is, like the number one thing you can do to monitor your health is to watch your weight. And most of us have been watching our weight for years, and we have our own relationships to weight watching. But when you start losing weight, if you lose more than 10 pounds in a month, there's something going on. So when there is weight loss, it begins to mean that something is happening. And truly at end of life, it's about water. You're losing water more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And be able to watch that process and know that when you've lost a lot of weight due to the water leaving your body, and then the swallowing is harder, it's not like anything is going to make you gain that weight again. And even if your family force feeds you lots and lots of food, you're not going to regain that weight and get your energy back. And it's extremely hard to tell families this, because this is the illusion that food will keep you alive.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, if a nurse says no food and you put food into that person's mouth, they don't swallow it, and the food goes directly into the lungs, and you can die of aspiration pneumonia in a couple of hours.
Oof.
So
or if you work with a professional who hasn't been trained by you or others, and they come to you and say, because I remember distinctly when my mother-in-law was dying, and she went through, as you're saying, and they got to the point where she couldn't eat, didn't want to eat. And one of the nurses at the facility, she would call me and say, do you know that today your mother-in-law only weighs, 87 pounds? And, and I think it was like she wanted me to come and enforce some kind of like put stuff in a tube and make her eat. And that was not the right answer. And so I think this person just would have benefited from some of your training. I think she would have benefited from some of your training.
I mean, truly, all the healthcare professionals need to be trained, not only in treatment and how to keep people alive, but how to let them die. Because it's not kind. We're back to this concept of suffering. It is suffering to watch someone be force-fed at end of life, and to not be able to take it in, knowing that the bowels, like, you don't put anything in a mouth that can't come out the other way.
Right.
You need to be realistic about how the body is functioning. And often it's just not worth it. And no amount of food will keep that person alive. And we need to have nurses, PSWs, all the other healthcare professionals that work at end of life they need to be trained to know what end of life looks like and how to make sure that a person is comfortable, but not force feed them.
And you teach, I think I know your book is also for professionals. Do you go and give workshops to professionals to help them understand these, these phases on the way to death?
I do. I've had roles when I did it as part of my full-time job. So I've worked in positions where it was part of my job. At this point, I'm doing more workshops and things like that. I did one earlier today for a combination of staff and volunteers at one of the local hospices. So I continue to provide a lot of information. I'm also involved in it with a number of movements. One is the Last Aid global movement, which is free 3-hour death education training for people across Canada. And it's a global movement, comes out of Germany, and it's similar to the first aid movement, which is all about training lay people to save lives. Well, the Last Aid movement is all about training lay people to help people die better.
I love that.
It's a beautiful movement. And the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association has just picked up the sponsorship of it, had been Ontario only. And in the coming months, you may see Last Aid advertised across Canada. It's one of the fantastic global movements that is trying to get more Canadians involved with the dying and death process. I also work with death cafes and have done in the 30s, probably heading up to 40 by now, death cafes throughout Ontario, where we have people coming together to talk about anything related to death. So it's a casual place. Sometimes we meet in bars, sometimes we meet in coffee shops. Right now, the Toronto Public Library has sponsored us, and we have free rooms in libraries around the city. And they are completely anonymous, no agenda, free. I basically do a little introduction at the beginning and then invite people to talk about anything related to death, often stories, and asking questions.
That's beautiful.
And it is one of the most insightful, enlightening, rewarding evenings, as people tell me. I've been doing it for about 10 years now, and it's an amazing experience. If any of your listeners are interested in attending one, it's a global movement again, and you can find out where one is locally by going on to deathcafe.com.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I know that they are here and as well. I'm in the United States, and I didn't know that they were so global. So that's a great tip, because we do have listeners in the United States, in Canada, and in many other countries around the world of the different languages, Germany, Sweden, etc. So definitely check out Death Cafe. And I have had others share with me, about just how valuable it is to have that safe space. Definitely. Definitely. Let's come back to some of your Buddhist practices. And you are very, you're strong. You have a strong positive energy, and you're very upbeat, but you are dealing with people who are going through sometimes some overwhelming sadness, definitely. So how do you maintain your reserves? How do you keep your strength up, and how do you keep yourself prepared to do this?
I mean, the short answer is I get a lot of support from the humans and the non-humans of this planet. So I lean heavily on the humans, as in my family, my friends, my Buddhist teacher, my Sangha. I also lean heavily on the non-humans, which from my perspective are all the sentient beings in this planet, in this universe. They include the trees, the plants, the water. I go to my cottage every weekend and I sit and look out at the sunsets. I watch the otters swimming in the lake. I pick raspberries. I really go to the land, and I'm so appreciative to our Indigenous stewards who have helped us keep this land and preserved it, and done such a good job of having it be here for all of us. And I get great inspiration from being with all the non-humans on the land.
Well, what an important reminder to have a full practice that includes everything and everyone around us, and the importance of being out in nature, whatever that looks like for any of us. nature, quiet time, reflection. And I really appreciate your acknowledgement of, like the trees and the otters. And, because now I'm just picturing you watching otters, and, otters always make me smile. I'll say otters always bring a smile to my face, most definitely. And what about equanimity? What about equanimity? Do you feel like you have a specific equanimity practice, like to keep this balance, or is it also informed by what you just shared with us?
I mean, it's certainly informed by what I just said. It's certainly part
Mhm.
of the Brahma practices. So equanimity is one of the Brahma. I lean heavily on all of them. When one
Mhm.
does I do loving kindness meditations, again, for humans and non-humans.
Mhm.
I find this balance really helpful. I do a lot of, I'm a Vajrayana Buddhist. I do a lot of Chinrezi practices, chanting. I love to go for walks in nature, chanting some of the compassion practices. And teaching of mudita, where really like being around joyful people. So
Mhm.
although I have a lot of death and loss around me, I also have a lot of really joyful people doing amazing things. And I find, being inspired by people young and old doing incredible things, really working with all the humans and the non-humans, I find inspirational. And all of that I find really supports my Buddhist practice. It supports my service to others in both meditation teacher role that I play, as well as psychotherapy. And all of this helps me stay strong, because I know that if I'm not strong, I can't give. And, I worked very hard during the pandemic. It was a long, hard time for us.
I bet.
Psychotherapists and meditation teachers were maxed out.
Mhm.
And I really just made sure I would give lots during the week, and I would go away on quiet weekends by myself with my husband, and we would just revel in the beauty of the trees and the water. And this to me is balance. This is the cycles of life and death, and it's the cycles of winter and summer and pandemic and moving on. So this is all part of what I would call my equanimity practice.
And balance is exactly the word that popped up to me.
Yeah.
For me, as you were speaking, I was thinking she has really good balance and some very good, clear boundaries,
Yes, I do.
which
Yes, I do.
seems so important. Do you have any other specific tips for us?
I mean, I guess I would say find your happy place.
Mhm.
Find your happy place and prioritize it. So we need to know what resonates with us. We need to know where our passion lies. It is so much easier waking up every morning and working hard and showing up for people, knowing that this is my passion, this is my calling. I 100% clear on my passion and my calling. And I think when we have passion, I clearly identified at
Mhm.
whatever stage of life we are, if we can identify our passion, we can actually keep showing up. And to me, this is like this is all about the meaning. This is what makes it fun to be Linda Hochstetler today. It's why I enjoy waking up and being of service, is because I feel like I've found my purpose. I understand why this is my lifetime. And I really enjoy being able to be joyful in this lifetime, and also be of service, and feeling like maybe I can sort of a Tonglen and take in some of the suffering of the world, while also really breathing out joy and positive energy as well.
I get that. I get that. Is there anything of all the things I've been trying to ask you all these questions, and I really am so appreciative of your sharing, and I'm learning so much. Is there anything that you would like to say that I didn't ask you about?
I guess the last thing I'll just add is, in the context of how all this fits together, I'm an ecotherapist, and I think there's so much. I wanted to sort of put a plug out to ecotherapy, and recognizing it's a growing field. It's part of adapting to climate change, and it's very important to make sure that we all of us, whether we're living in the cities or living in the countries, wherever we are, that we can turn to uh, nature and the environment, and try to make sure that we're playing an active role in addressing what's happening at the climate change level.
And when you say this and you talk about ecotherapy, is it it may be more than one thing, so I want to get really clear on this. Is it me learning how I can help counteract what is already in play? Is it me handling the difficult feelings I have because weather patterns are changing and things are flooding and summers are hotter depending on where you live? Maybe help me understand that a little better.
Well, if you understand that ecotherapy is really about using everything in ecology and psychotherapy and spirituality, which for me is my Buddhism, and combining those three in such a way that we can remember that we cannot harm any other sentient being without harming ourselves. And it really is about recognizing the interconnectedness between ourselves and others. And that is at the core of ecotherapy, that there is no separateness. There is no me, there's no you, there's no, oh, I feel bad for you and your forest fires. They have nothing to do with me. That's not true. So ecotherapy brings together many of these pieces, and in some ways it's another angle into the death and life cycle that we get in Buddhism, but it's another way in to see that we are all interconnected. And if we saw that, we could not possibly harm each other in the way that we are doing, both at the human level in war, at the environmental level when we cut down trees and wreck the landscape, and we cannot harm each other on a personal basis, whether that be our partners, our children, our parents, but that we're all in this together.
You remind me, and I'm not going to quote it completely accurately, but there's a sutta in the Pali Canon, and part of it is one who truly loves oneself could never really harm another.
It's so beautiful. I love it.
Yeah, thank you.
That sums it up very well.
Thank you. You have a beautiful spirit and energy, and thank you so much for being here today. And I know that this is going to be so useful for others. And I just want to check in before I sign off to see if there's anything else you would like to add.
No, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to let me speak about my passion. Thank you for, I thank my teachers for such great learning that has brought me here, whether that's my Buddhist teachers, my psychotherapy teachers, and just the informal teachers as well. So thanks for inviting me to be with you.
Oh, thank you for being in the world. I've got books for you, starting with Carpooling with Death, How Living with Death Will Make You Stronger, Wiser, and Fearless. The book that got me going and helped me to discuss going through the death of my loved ones, followed by Sitting with Death, Buddhist insights to help you face your fears and live a peaceful life, based on season 1 of the Death Dhamma podcast. And just recently, Enlightenment Unleashed, how your pet can lead you to spiritual transformation, because during our lifetime, we may see the rising and ceasing of many pets, and we love them like they are our family. Find these on Amazon.com or come see me at MargaretMaloney.com. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on MargaretMaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.